when we're looking at the length of time it takes us to heal, and when we're looking at the discouragement we can sometimes feel, it's helpful to put it into a context. So, what I've noticed is in my own nervous system, and then that of really everybody that we're working together here, and it doesn't matter how we get here, there's a lot of trauma education around right now. A lot of people are talking about it way more than pre COVID, for sure. And I've noticed maybe it's just kind of a little bit in my bubble, I'm sure it is. But there's a lot of somatic trauma education now, and groups and teachers, and it's on Instagram and it's all over the place, that there's really a recognition that we need to know a little bit more about our nervous system and about how trauma works. And as we do that, then we're going to have the tools. We can develop skill and effectiveness in the tools to recognize what's happening in our nervous system and to bring ourselves back into regulation. So when we're more trauma informed, we're less reactive. I think it's fair to say that our nervous system, for most of us, especially if we've been doing this for a while, is on a trend to being more settled more often. So what that doesn't mean is that we're always emotionally regulated, that's for sure. But that is the trend, that we have more awareness, we have more ease in our breath, we have less contraction in our body. One of the things that I noticed quite a few years ago with PTSD is that when I was newly experiencing it, it took a long time. It actually took several months after I was physically assaulted to come back into any kind of a state of regulation. And then after that, as I was working through that and I was doing these healing practices and working with my nervous system that was terrified, then after a while, I got so that sometimes I would notice I got a bit activated, and it would take several days, and then I would kind of come back to regulation. Usually I would recognize it because I've done mindfulness and practice for a long time. But sometimes I wouldn't until I'm like, oh man, what's going on here? I'm in a rage at somebody that's driving ahead of me or something. Okay, my nervous system is all jacked up about something. So what I noticed is that I wouldn't go so deeply into a trough and I could come back sooner. And the people that I talk with are very similar. It doesn't last as long and it's not as bad when the activation happens, but it still happens. So some of the things that we might notice is that we're not as compulsive in the mind. My mind used to be just full of catastrophic thinking. And every once in a while that will happen now. Not very often. And as soon as it does, I'll notice it's like, okay, here I am planning ahead for some catastrophe that actually isn't happening and probably won't happen. And I have a lot of tools now that I can use. I almost never have an inner critic anymore. I've really worked, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, I've really worked with not shaming myself. And that's a big part of healing the inner critic as well. So we notice that we have more ability to come back to ourselves. We're kinder to ourselves. Many of us have done those kind of exercises of noticing if someone I loved or a good friend was in the same situation as I'm in, would I feel compassion for them or would I be pushy and aggressive with them the way I am with myself? And so having that transform itself is a huge, huge foundation for healing, both for our happier life, but also just for healing our nervous system because we're not so aggressive and pushy with ourselves. It's startling to see, and it happens, I've never seen it happen any other way, that when we're feeling really cold hearted and shut down towards ourselves, if we think about someone we love or anybody else really in that same position, we'd have a lot more kindness for them. So, this is one of the effects of healing as well, is that we're starting to be more kind hearted, more open hearted towards ourselves, more likely to be on our own side, more likely to not kind of participate in putting ourselves down or that disconnection. And then as some of the alarm in the nervous system starts to settle, then other things come in that were already there. And it could be we have more silence in our mind, that we get a better sleep because we don't have so many bad dreams. We're not as restless. One of the effects of trauma is for many people is we have a hard time going to bed, because as soon as we get to bed, our thoughts start to run kind of rampant, or we might also have associations of danger with bed. But even if we don't, just that time on our own with just our mind can be really disconcerting. So, as we heal some of that and the mind becomes quieter, we're probably going to treat ourselves better. And we're probably going to have enough stillness in the body and mind that we can get better sleep. And again, it's not a switch that we turn off or on where we have 100% good sleep and then, but it's definitely trending in that direction. And then the other thing is that our compulsions tend to loosen their grip. We talked about it the last couple of weeks. We're talking about our bodies, loving our bodies, and fat shaming in particular. It can be really a practice, a difficult, advanced practice to stay loving towards ourselves at whatever weight we are, whatever's going on in our body, whatever we look like, whatever we used to look like, what we want to look like again. And it's not at all to say that we are wrong to try and have a healthy body and eat well. Of course, that's wonderful. And it's also not conducive to a healthy body to be shaming ourselves. So we find that some of these cravings might still be here, and especially with COVID and the higher level of stress that so many people feel, and that they don't quite have the same power that they used to. They're not as compulsive, maybe. So we have a little bit more room to work with the habit, to work with the biological, the hormones, the chemicals in our body that, the dopamine and all of that, that kind of pulls us towards that because we're just generally more settled. So we have emotional space. We can enjoy our life. We might be more creative. We're not as scared as we used to be of connecting with other people. We're not as irritable, maybe. We have more bandwidth. We have a wider window of tolerance for people. So let's just take a moment before we move on and for everybody just to reflect, what's your situation as you're looking at some of these elements? What's your situation? Does that feel true in your experience? And some of them probably will more than others. And maybe some, one or two of those will come to mind as something that still is very distressing. Like if we have a certain level of fear about something, an irrational fear that doesn't really make sense, but it hasn't really gone away, or if we have a compulsion that's still fairly strong. So you might also notice if there's anything in particular that you would really like for that to change. Just notice that for a moment. And as you're noticing it, notice what happens. What's the response to those thoughts in your body? To build on what we were working with last week and the week before. So, if this is an issue for you, if it's not, you could use something else, use a different example. But I was just looking at the persistence of our responses and relating that back to how many thousands of times we had those experiences. So, what we know about the primitive brain and nervous system is that it learns from our experiences. So, if you were fat shamed at school, if you weren't allowed bad foods and you ate them in secret, if you and another person, maybe your mom or a partner or somebody, if you binge ate together, then you're going to have that emotional connection around that. If you ate, in secret and that was really an emotional soothing, then your system's going to be set up to associate those certain foods with feeling better, feeling more soothed. So the patterns that happen in our mind and our body happen over thousands of times. And then to top that off, we often have the pattern of eating in that way or doing whatever the process is that you're thinking about for yourself at a time of emotion, heightened emotion. So we might have been feeling a lot of shame. And this is how we kind of regulate or get ourselves back into more of a soothed state. We often build beliefs, core deficiency beliefs, based on our experiences. So if you had the experience of being fat shamed, for instance, you're going to believe that there's something wrong with you. And in our diet culture, the predominant culture has a lot of shame and judgment around our eating and body size. So it's not like something that we can resist believing completely, especially if it happened as a child. So if it happened just in one place, but at home you were really valued and you had a really healthy relationship with your food and body, but at school it happened or in a certain time period, that's going to be still very difficult and not quite as bad as if you hadn't had that support at home or if you were getting it in both places. So when we look at the number of experiences that our nervous system has had and over the number of years that it's had those experiences, the reason I bring that up is just to point out how much time, and if we talk about the neural networks and the neural pathways that are happening as we're building these beliefs, as we're having these experiences, as we're holding them in our body, so we have sensations, energies in our body, then it makes sense that it's going to take time to heal and overlay some of those old experiences and beliefs with our current beliefs about it. Shaming is a big part of that. So, this feeling ashamed of our bodies and feeling ashamed of our nervous system, feeling ashamed of pretty much everything that's not what our popular culture would call acceptable, is something that leads us to disconnecting from ourselves and that compulsion to get out of here. So during this practice and during the day and during the week as well, it's a really good practice to just keep coming back to where am I on the polyvagal ladder? So this is Stephen Porges' work and it's adapted from Deb Dana. So the ventral vagal, I feel connected to the world. So it's trust, connect. So sometimes we'll call that the trust and connect state. And it's a feeling in our body of safety, emotional safety, physical safety. If we don't have that, then we're in some kind of a fight, flight, or freeze response. So the fight or flight is I'm in danger, I need to run away, or I need to fight back. And this is not usually physical danger in our culture, it's usually emotional, social. So if you're if you're feeling anxious about going back to work, for instance, or feeling anxious about going into a store, or what if I run into this person? Then that's a feeling of threat, and your nervous system is going to respond somehow. Probably one of the fight, flight, freeze. So if you're noticing that your shoulders are up around your ears, if you notice that you're holding your breath, if you notice that you've got a lot of catastrophic thoughts in your mind, those are all signs that you're in a survival response. And then we can do other things. We can, do box breathing. We can do longer exhalations. We can give ourselves a hug. We can do all of these things that will help us to regulate. But first, we have to notice that we're in that state. And dorsal vagal is one of the harder ones because we're really pretty shut down. And so it's not like any of these are bad. They're all very functional in certain situations. But the dorsal vagal, the really shut down state can take us over for a lot of our life. And we just feel kind of disconnected. We don't have any enthusiasm. We're not really in an active state. We're kind of really in a shutdown state. We might be barely breathing, so it's really hard on our physical health as well as our emotional health. So to have a practice of noticing and releasing shaming around what we're finding, not shaming ourselves for having these responses. So if we refer back to how many thousands of times that our nervous system has been conditioned to act a certain way, it's not surprising that we have these responses. Plus, everybody has these responses. Even people who don't have a lot of trauma in their life have these responses. That's how our bodies are. We live in these mammal bodies, and we're not helpless in terms of what our experience is. So the conditioning is in our animal body. So it's not so much in our cognitive minds, although it certainly comes in through that. So I wanted to pause here for a moment and just to look at some of your conditioning. So, what is it that you're feeling? I've got two examples here. One is about family and one is about work. But you might have a different example that was coming up in the last few minutes. So, let's take about 3 or 4 minutes to just kind of sit with this and just pick one and notice if you're having stress right now about maybe having to get together with family again. One of the things that happened for many people during COVID is that we didn't have to be around people that were difficult. And so our window of tolerance might have gotten a little bit more narrow. Things often aren't smooth, especially with family who generally feel quite entitled to say and do whatever they want. And so it might be more difficult for us to have someone around who's pressuring us, who's treating us poorly, wanting us to just get along and go along with the family culture of not naming things, quit being so sensitive, all of those judgments that we've had. So it might be that even that it's a volume of the amount of time and the number of people is different now. So that might be something you could look into, or maybe it's something about work. Maybe you've gained weight during COVID and you're going to have to go back into this environment now, an environment that could feel still pretty risky, especially with people who are working where there's no masks. Is it going to be okay if you feel nervous about being that close to other people? So let's take a few minutes now. And as you're doing that, connect with your breath. Notice your feet on the floor. You could hold your own hand. Just really notice your own nervous system. Keep yourself regulated as you're looking at that. And it's always okay to take a step back. You could do that by taking a step back, noticing that you've got certain thoughts in your mind, certain reactions in your body. You could do some tapping or put the images into a frame. There's all of those ways that we work with this. You could just pay attention to what's going on in your body, put some space around it. If there's energy or sensation that's making you uneasy, you could stand up and shake. You could throw the energy down, give yourself a hug. But just remain aware that there are ways to stay present in this moment as you're looking at this, and give yourself permission to do that. And then let's come back, finish off what you're writing. So, one thing we know is that the times that we're in right now with the worldwide pandemic and the polarization between people who believe in one way and people who believe in another way is that everybody's more stressed. And that's something that even a very well regulated nervous system, we're going to feel more stressed because there's more threat. And it's an actual threat. People are getting COVID, they're dying. There's a lot of personal circumstances as well. If you're having trouble connecting with some of your family, for instance, because you might be on the opposite side, or maybe you've been touched directly by COVID in your family or close friends, then everybody's going to be more stressed and much less resilient. One of the things that happens when we're more stressed and we have more fear is that our primitive brain tends to rule and we have less access to our higher level brain functioning. We have more of a fight, flight, freeze response that we're dealing with. And so it's good to just see that that's the case. And some of the supports that we can normally rely on just aren't available to us. They're, maybe the person that we would normally go to with something is not there anymore. Maybe they've just been really snowed under with the kinds of stress they're dealing with. So we can't really count on that support. And maybe we're used to being able to offer our support to other people now, and we can't because we can't travel there, or it's different. And then what tends to happen when we feel less resilient and more fear is that we fall into old patterns. So we might get into a really controlling pattern. Might be that we're watching the news all the time, that we're doing a bunch of internet research on something like COVID or something else, and that we feel like we're just in a state of despair because we've been thrown back into a state that was familiar in the past and we thought we'd left it behind. So when we think about or see this image of the dam breaking, our dam will always break if there's too much stress and not enough supports. Whenever we're exceeding our capacity to stay regulated, we're going to get dysregulated. And so to acknowledge the reality of that, I'm going to be dysregulated at times, not just now, but anytime, anytime throughout our life. There will be times when we get into hypervigilance, catastrophic thinking, our breath won't be very healthy. All of those things are always going to happen. So the issue isn't that we have a nervous system that's responding to the environment. The issue is, in part, that we forget that we can work with our nervous system, that we can come back to regulation more quickly, and we get kind of in despair because we feel like we shouldn't be having these experiences. So it could be a gradual buildup of stress, or it could be a sudden change. For many people, the change from the lockdown to no masks and everybody's kind of out in the open again was very sudden. And even to look at a picture of a shopping mall full of people, our nervous system isn't going to know that suddenly it's safer because we've been experiencing over the last year and a half that we're not safe when other people are around. So our nervous system is going to have a response. And I'm sure many of us have noticed that when we're out into the stores again, when we're out doing different things. And it can feel like we're hitting the snake on the snakes and ladders where we're just like, and we go all the way back to starting. So if it feels like you're going back to square one, if it feels like you've lost all your progress, that's not actually true. We don't actually lose the progress. It's just that right now we might need to do more regulating practices. We might need to really increase the amount of kindness and compassion. So often what happens is when this happens and we get into a setback, that we start to shame ourselves for having a nervous system, but for not having a strong enough nervous system. And then the inner critic gets going and we forget to breathe. We forget that we have some experience in these practices that will help to bring us back. And we can get really sunk into kind of a despair. And so one of the things that we can do with that is to change our perspective, to acknowledge that this isn't the only thing that's ever going to happen. So sometimes we can cultivate kindness and compassion. Sometimes we can feel really connected with other people and with ourselves. But if not, if we're in a fight, flight, freeze response, then our old habits are going to have a lot more power over us for a while. And it doesn't really matter what it is that takes us out of connection. We're out of connection. So we're out of, we think about the polyvagal system and the vagal ladder. The ventral vagal is that state of trust and connect when we're not in fight, flight, or freeze. And we don't have as much access to that. And then we notice, we come back, we do practices, whatever it is that helps us to regulate, and then we're able to come back into a more settled state. So I'm assuming with this is that everybody has experiences of shame. So I wanted to take a moment before we move to the last slide to do a little practice of moving shame out of your body. So first of all, notice if there's any shame here right now. And you could maybe think back to what we were just inquiring into. Is there any sense that I should be able to handle things better than I am? If there is, then there's probably an element of shame with that. What happens with shame is we tend to slump over. We bring our eyes down. We don't want to be seen. So just changing your body position, bring your shoulders down and back, move around, stand up and move around. So this is very helpful especially if you're really caught in a pretty deep experience of shame. Stand up and move around, do something to break the body posture of shame. So you could do that right now if you want, or just kind of move in your seat. And to do some deep breaths or box breathing. So let's do the box breathing just for a moment as an example if anyone is not familiar with it. And I know some of you are familiar with it and it's a real favorite. So just take a deep in-breath and then hold 2, 3, 4. Breathe out 2, 3, 4. Hold your breath 2, 3, 4. Breathe in 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Breathe out 2, 3, 4. Hold 2, 3, 4. Breathe in 3, 4. And then just let your breath go back to whatever pattern it is. And just doing that little practice for a minute can really help us to see the impact of our breath. Box breathing and any of those kind of patterns of breath will help us to interrupt the cycle if we're getting into a panicky state. It helps us to bring ourselves back to this moment. You could also tap lightly on your forehead. You could tap on your body. You could just kind of touch your body. You could bring your awareness into your feet, your seat. All of those things will help us to come back into this moment. And then bring your eyes up. And so if somewhere outside that you can look, bring your eyes up and let yourself look outward and upward. So again, the shame posture is very inward focused and down. So bringing your eyes up and your head up. And then make eye contact with someone friendly if you can. So you could look at me or some of the people on the screen. If you have a picture of someone you love that you can see, pull up your phone and see a picture, you could do that. So whether it's a picture or a live person, see if you can make eye contact. So one of the real difficult things about shame is that we want to hide. If we come into some kind of connection again, it really helps to release us from the shame. So when we're feeling shame, one of the ways that we might notice that is that kind of curling in on ourselves. We kind of slump over, our eyes are down. We don't want anyone to see us. That's one of the kind of the elements of shame. And so to do something different, bring your shoulders up, look into someone's face that you can count on to be friendly. It might be your dog or it might be a picture of someone. And just bring your awareness back into your body. So let's work with a fear or an anxiety or something that feels overwhelming to you right now. And as you're doing that, keep coming back to regulating in your body. And take some deeper breaths. Feel the sensations in your body. So this might be what you were working with before or something different. Something that's causing some feeling of distress. And really to sink into noticing it is actually okay to feel upset or overwhelmed. So you could be, have your hand on your heart if you want, or just tuning into your own nervous system, to your own self, and let yourself know in a soothing voice it's okay to feel upset or overwhelmed. I'm paying attention, I'm here with you, and I won't abandon you. I'm here. You could be holding your own hands and feel the support, the warmth of your own hands. So often, when we had a fear or anxiety in the past, we were really on our own. And now we could have our adult, healthier self be here and soothe and comfort ourselves. And if we're feeling shame because we feel overwhelmed, we could just say, that's not true. There's nothing unusual about feeling afraid or overwhelmed. That's how our system works. It's natural, and you're not alone with it anymore. And if it feels okay, take some deep breaths. Really bring in the air and then release the air. And then with resilience, you could just remind yourself, we've done so many hard things in the past. And in the past, I might have done those hard things by pushing or being aggressive with myself, but now I can do these with kindness and awareness and compassion. I don't have to push myself. I can take a deep breath and say that thing. Actually, I'm not coming to the get together on Sunday, or I can't allow you to speak with me like that. We've done a lot of hard things. And from this relationship with ourselves of kindness, we can support ourselves in doing hard things again, including whatever it is that's feeling kind of hard or overwhelming right now. And you might even want to bring in a memory of something hard that you did, something you said or did that was difficult, and feel that in your body. Notice the images, notice what was happening there. We've all had this ability and experiences of standing up for ourselves, being kind. So you could let yourself remember that. So negativity bias in the brain is going to help us remember all the times we didn't. So take a moment to really feel into, what does it feel like when I am strong and resilient? I might be feeling overwhelmed, but I also know how to come back. I know how to support my nervous system. I know that this is just my nervous system doing its thing. There's nothing wrong with me because I'm in a state of fight, flight, freeze. And then use the tools, breathing, tapping, holding your own hand. Use the tools that you have to come back and just keep coming back to awareness, to the present moment. And notice if there's any shaming, if there's any inner critic. If there is, we could just notice that, bring it into awareness. That's actually not true. Whatever that mean voice is, I don't have to listen to that. It's not going to help. I can forgive myself or let go of shame that I feel overwhelmed. It's nothing wrong with me. Everybody feels overwhelmed when circumstances are a certain way. But I come back into a state of being kind. I don't have to fix everything in my life before I can be kind with myself. I could just be kind. So we'll stay with this for a minute or two so that you could kind of finish, wrap up a little bit and get ready to come back. Just to breathe, stay present in your body, and work with yourself with kindness.